Good morning. So there's a conversation I've had many times over the years with people who are getting ready to join a Quest. And it goes something like this. I've looked at the bios of the rest of the group, and to be honest, they're all doing such amazing things with their lives. You know, I kind of question whether I really deserve to be here. Well, I don't know how much time you've spent studying the bios in the back of the program. I do know that we've already started to have some very rich conversations with one another. And I imagine you're well on your way to appreciating what an awesome bunch of people you are. All I can say to anyone who's still feeling a little overwhelmed or questioning why they're here is that standing in front of you this morning, I know how you feel. So, the idea of this, our first powwow, it's been bubbling for a while. It's been a wonderful journey over the last 12 years, working with colleagues to create quests in many different countries and for people from all walks of life. It's been a journey of looking at the world through the eyes and experiences of others, and of asking ourselves, the question Simon mentioned, what really matters? It's been about reflecting on the choices we make and the values we bring to whatever it is that we do. There have been lots of different outcomes and plenty of people, I can see many people in the room here today, who can give you examples of those. One of the most important, I think, is that Leaders Quest has grown to be a community of about 6,000 people today. And indeed, one of our challenges is to how to embrace and harness and kind of let loose all of that energy. Something you're very welcome to contribute to with ideas this week. So many of you in the room today are Quest alumni, or have hosted us in your homes or in your businesses, or supported the work of the Leaders Quest Foundation. Some of you have done all three, and others are new friends for whom something about what we're doing resonates. And I want to start by simply thanking all of you, old friends and new. I know it's taken a long journey, both physically and in terms of time and resources, for many of you to be here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for making that choice. So what's it all about? The decision to invite 100 people to come and spend this time together in a truly extraordinary setting. Given all the talent and potential in the room, all the effort and the air travel just to show up, what will make it worthwhile? Well, for me, the powwow is about active hope. And what I mean by that is not simply blind optimism that tomorrow will be a better day, or that all the world's ills will inevitably cure themselves. Rather, I mean hope that requires courage in a way that optimism does not. There are three elements to this that I'd like to suggest as a foundation for our time together. First, active hope means having the courage to ask tough questions, even when there may be no easy or obvious solutions. The capacity to let go of some of our own certainty and judgment. To sit with sometimes not knowing which path to take, and to trust that it's okay not to have the answers. Second, active hope means having the courage to listen, even when it may be uncomfortable to do so. To truly hear one another. To notice what nature has to tell us. To listen to our own inner voices. But above all, I think active hope means having the courage to act. To define who we are by the choices we make and the way that we live. Now, every one of you here has joined us in Rajasthan for a reason, maybe for several. And even if it's not totally obvious to you right now what all of those may be, I'm very confident that by the end of Wednesday, it'll be much, much clearer. The projects and ideas that are catalyzed, the relationships already being formed, the shifts that happen on the inside, will ripple out beyond us. And that, of course, I know is why you're here. So why active hope? And why today in 2013 is it so important? Well, as I reflected on all those intimidating bios and the expertise and talent in the room, I knew that whatever I might say to you this morning, there are dozens of you who know more than I do on each and every issue. So with apologies in advance for what I omit or get wrong, I'd like to share with you some thoughts on where we are in 2013 and why a gathering like this one really matters. An idea I often hear today is that we are at a uniquely important moment in history. Well, I guess every moment's unique, and frankly, I don't know whether it's this one or the next one that matters most. But like all of you, I do know that humanity faces some really major challenges, and most of them are of our own making. Whether it's Syria right now, whether it's places like the Congo, where suffering continues year after year, through to the tens of millions of people all over the world in search of a job and the simple dignity of being needed. Or the uncomfortable reality that the economic growth we need to generate all this employment is completely unsustainable without radical systemic change. Life looks pretty complicated and often ambiguous. And I, for one, find myself sometimes feeling deeply sad as I reflect on just how many mistakes and misunderstandings we humans make and the consequences that follow. And yet, in that tendency to see our own moment in the sun as a unique one, I think we often miss what's getting better. We rightly think of the 20th century as being a bloody one, with terrible wars and genocide. Yet before the days of nation-states, tribal warfare was 9 times as deadly, even as our own rather dismal recent history. Prehistoric man fared even worse, with 1 in 7 people meeting a violent death at the hands of another. And in medieval Europe, the murder rate was 30 times what it is today. So violent as the world is, it's much less so than it used to be. And we're also living much longer. At the beginning of the 20th century, life expectancy at birth globally was about 31 years. Today, the equivalent figure is 67. So whilst inequality is rising in many parts of the world, and I personally believe is one of the major issues of our time, global poverty actually halved in the last 25 years. In large part, of course, because of the rise of Asia, and in particular, China. So why then does the world today sometimes feel so overwhelming and so confusing, especially when we think about the future? I think a major source of our collective uncertainty is what's often called the Great Acceleration. And by that, I mean the incredible transformational changes that have happened at an accelerating pace, beginning first with the Industrial Revolution and then speeding up dramatically in the last 50 years. Let's start with population. For many centuries prior to the invention of industrial agriculture, global population never exceeded about 15 million people. And then began a steady rise. So by the mid-19th century, we'd reached 1 billion. By the 1970s, we were at 4 billion. Today, as we all know, there are over 7 billion people on the planet, and we expect to be well over 9 billion by 2050, with much of that increase taking place in the nations least able to cope with it. In large part, of course, this is down to improvements in sanitation and healthcare, which means that many of us live much longer, and a far smaller proportion of children die in infancy today than they did a century ago. So we have a population graph that looks like a hockey stick. And unsurprisingly, a lot of other data follows suit. From depleting fish stocks, to the loss of forests and of fresh water, to the rise in desertification and of CO2 in the atmosphere, and the growth in material consumption in just about everything. Graph after graph just takes off as we plot our impact on the planet. So great is the current rate of plant and animal species loss that, as my own children tell me, mankind is now in the process of contributing to the Holocene extinction, or the sixth mass extinction, an impact which geologists, if they're still around in a few thousand years, will be able to track through fossil records. So if we go back to those graphs that plot the growth of population, consumption, and ecological impact, there's another set of lines that follow a similar path. And they're the lines that track technological know-how, the rise of scientific knowledge, and the modern and postmodern world as we know it. One of them, of course, is Moore's Law, named after Gordon Moore, the co-founder of the company Intel. In essence, it states that the power of computing approximately doubles every 2 years. It was a prediction he made in 1965, and it's proven to be uncannily accurate. So processing speed, memory capacity, sensors, and even the number and size of pixels in digital cameras are all improving, increasing at exponential rates. Thanks to brain power, thanks to ingenuity, and scientific breakthroughs in multiple fields, we've put ourselves on a fast track, capable even of changing the course of our own evolution by manipulating DNA. And yet, deep down, we know that something's wrong. We may be clever, but we're not yet wise. It's this imbalance, I think, the gap between all the stuff we know and the way we sometimes treat each other, that feels so disturbing. As my colleagues will tell you, I'm fairly incompetent when it comes to technology. But I look at that fantastic growth in our scientific capabilities, completely unprecedented in history. I look at our growth in numbers and our environmental footprint. I look at the rise in inequality in so many places, despite improvements in standards of living for millions of people in the last 20 years. And like many of you, I wonder where we're heading. I read a book this month that gave me further food for thought on all of this. It's called What Money Can't Buy: The Moral Limits of Markets. And it's written by Professor Michael Sandel of Harvard University. Sandel argues that without quite realizing it, without ever deciding to do so, we've drifted from having market economies to being market societies. Amongst the sometimes absurd examples that he shares of markets run amok are the following: the opportunity to fight in Somalia or Afghanistan, price tag between $250 and $1,000 a day, depending on experience. The opportunity to stand in line on Capitol Hill in Washington to hold a place for a lobbyist who wants to attend a congressional hearing, a job apparently favored by homeless people, which attracts a fee of $15 to $20 an hour. The chance to earn $777 by having the back of your head tattooed with a marketing message for Air New Zealand. Or to pay $150,000 for the privilege of shooting an endangered black rhino. My personal favorite, however, has to be the opportunity to pay for a prison cell upgrade in Santa Ana, California. $82 a night for a clean, quiet jail cell away from the cells of non-paying prisoners. When we think of the morality of markets, Sandel says, we think first of Wall Street banks, of hedge funds, of bailouts, and regulatory reform. But the moral and political challenge we face today is more pervasive and more mundane. To rethink the role and reach of markets in our social practices, human relationships, and everyday lives. Which brings me to the main point that I'd like to share with you this morning. And it's about the imbalance and sometimes folly of human development and how we respond. On the one hand, we've achieved the kind of technological brilliance that's given us vaccines for deadly diseases, solar-powered lights across thousands of villages, and access to knowledge and almost instant communication beyond our wildest dreams. In a single century, humankind has gone from the first aerial photograph taken in 1868 from a hot air balloon above a field in northern France to pictures of the Earth taken from the far side of the moon. Yet on the other hand, we're still frightened of strangers. We're still unable to adequately feed, clothe, and educate everyone. And so we might ask ourselves, do we seriously want to reduce citizenship to a set of market criteria, paying someone else to stand in line, or buying our way out of justice? Do we seriously want to focus our smartest inventions on creating ever more stuff to consume, rather than developing ways to live together within the means of the planet? Intellectually, scientifically, the human species is in the midst of a period of stunning transformational change. After hundreds of years of progressing at a relatively modest pace, we've accelerated in an extraordinary fashion, with the graphs that plot all of this literally shooting through the roof. But this is only one facet of what it means to be a human being. In the meantime, where are we in terms of emotional development? Where are we on ethics and spiritual growth? What happens when we stick these on a graph and plot our evolution over time? The great challenge we face today, I think, and the source of the dis-ease that people feel, often without quite being able to put their finger on it, is the huge disparity between our intellectual capacity and our emotional, ethical, and spiritual growth. The feeling that we're out of balance, and we need to pay attention to a different kind of growth. One of my favorite movies is Invictus, the film about Nelson Mandela, with South Africa winning the Rugby World Cup in the first year of his presidency. Amongst the special moments in that movie, one that stands out is the scene when he enters the presidential office for the first time, and he finds all the white staff busy packing their boxes, ready to move out. Their assumption is that as whites, they've been beaten, and they'll now pay the price and lose their jobs. But Mandela calls them all together, describes how much their country needs them, and asks that they stay. It's an act of awesome forgiveness and inclusion. Now, Mandela, of course, spent 27 years in prison honing the compassion and wisdom that lent him the capacity to invite his former enemies to step up if they chose so to do, and to help build a nation. Most of us, thankfully, don't pay that price. But it does beg the question as to how we develop the leaders the world so badly needs, not only on the global stage, but equally importantly, locally, in businesses and communities. How do we, including all of us in this room, grow emotionally, ethically, and spiritually to match the brilliance we've unleashed and to respond to the immense opportunities in the world today. When we think about some of the leaders we most admire, unsung heroes, as well as people like Mandela, it's easy to miss the hard work and suffering that went into the growth of that person. It's easy to brush over the dark night of the soul that's part of how we mature as people. In fact, one of my hopes, as I reflect on this remarkable increase in life expectancy over the last 100 years, is that we can take some of the 30 or 40 years that we've gained, acquire some wisdom in our middle age, and put it to good use. So, as Max mentioned last night, 9 months ago, we began work on the powwow. And a small group of us from Leaders Quest sat up here after dinner one night under a beautiful sky, and courtesy of Jamer's iPad, we watched a video of a lecture given by the zoologist and geneticist David Suzuki. Many of you will know his work, and for those of you who don't, I highly recommend it. It's called the Legacy Lecture. Suzuki speaking as an elder, with the freedom as he saw it to speak the truth from his heart, and with the wisdom that comes with being well into his 70s. He spoke of the work of the Human Genome Project, decoding the 3 billion letters in a single human nucleus, and demonstrating that 99% of the genes in a human cell are identical to those of chimpanzees. He described how tens of thousands of our genes are the same as those found in salmon and fruit flies and cedar trees. He spoke about the web of life that connects all living things, the air that mammals breathe, without which we barely survive a couple of minutes, the role of plants in the carbon cycle, and the fascinating thought experiment from astronomer Harlow Shapley that says that every breath of air that you or I take contains millions of atoms of argon, a gas that makes up just under 1% of the Earth's atmosphere, that were once in the lungs of Jesus Christ and Muhammad, of Gandhi and Martin Luther King, or for that matter, of Hitler and Stalin and Pol Pot. I am air, Suzuki said. You are air. We are air. We are one another. And the way we see the world shapes the way we treat it. It was a difficult night for those of us watching that video of Suzuki. I think we each went through our own small crisis, sitting in the dark, listening to some deep truths. I found myself kind of bereft as I thought about what we were losing and my own role in it. I knew then that I wanted to be able to stand in front of you today and speak about what I see. The questions I'd like to share with you are these. How do we step up? How do we sink into the deep knowing of what matters most? What does it mean for education, for corporate, political, and institutional leaders? What does it mean for us, here, now, today? The point of the Mandela story is it's not an easy path. Growth of the human spirit is sometimes painful as well as joyful. Without that, without being prepared to push through the fog, we simply don't grow up. So let's come back to active hope and our purpose in being here together. There are so many reasons to be positive. We're not heading down a preordained track. We have the opportunity, each and every one of us, to make a positive impact in small ways and large ones. The scale is not the point. As Mahatma Gandhi said, whatever you do may seem insignificant, but it's most important that you do it. There's a humor and humility in that notion that I think reflects what life is all about. Embracing the good and the not so good. Being fully awake, not shy of complexity, nor overwhelmed by it. And then having the vision and the courage to take part. Sometimes the individual actions of a small group of people add up to huge impact. Later tonight, some of us will hear from Kailash Satyarthi, who spent much of his life working to eradicate modern-day slavery and child labour. When I met him for supper a few months back with my colleague Aditi, I asked him, I have to say rather expecting to get a pessimistic answer, whether things were getting better. Absolutely, he replied. It's so much better than when I started this work 40 years ago. So let's take that one topic, human slavery, a trade, of course, which continues today and is estimated to be worth about $30 billion a year, but which is a fraction of the problem that it used to be, thanks to the efforts of a remarkably small group of individuals over many years. The first society for the abolition of the slave trade was formed by just 12 men in 1787, at a time when 3/4 of the people on Earth lived under some form of enslavement or debt bondage. And it was widely argued that slavery couldn't be ended without crashing the global economy. 20 years later, the transatlantic slave trade was abolished in the British Parliament and in the American Congress. And 26 years after that, it was abolished throughout the British Empire. There were many ironies, of course, and many ups and downs in that journey. The British government paid massive compensation to slave owners as part of the deal, but nothing to the slaves themselves. And ladies across Europe, unable even to vote, made their voices heard by refusing to take sugar in their tea, knowing that the sugar cane had been grown and cut down by slaves. An early example of consumer power, even amongst the disenfranchised. I'd like to close by turning to a story from closer to home. I met Paul Dickinson. Where's Paul? I met Paul 12 years ago in the woods in Devon in southwest England, when he was in the middle of dreaming up the idea for the Carbon Disclosure Project, with the modest goal of transforming the global economic system. His idea was to harness the power of the investor community to ask major corporations to disclose their impact on the environment every year in the form of actionable data. He believed that once these hidden costs were made visible, business leaders would be much more likely to take action to reduce their footprint. Paul, along with a small band of other crazy people, including our wonderful associate here, Nigel, are pioneers in this space, working with an improbably small annual budget. Yet today, CDP has the backing of 722 institutional investors, who between them manage $87 trillion of global investment. Over 4,000 companies and 126 cities report through CDP, and all the information is available free on the internet. Despite all these successes, there is, of course, still a long way to go. CDP's latest report came out earlier this month. And while some companies are making real strides, many others are languishing at the bottom of the table. Whilst we have the technology to tackle climate change and other major problems, politically, institutionally, and even individually, we appear to not yet have the structures, the will, and the compassion to make sensible decisions. Interestingly, in this year's survey, the 3 most prominent companies that refused to submit their data were Amazon, Facebook, and Apple. I guess it's an example of how hard it is to define what greatness is. Is it creativity, beautiful design, and business models that change the way we work? Or is it transparency and a willingness to pursue bold goals without knowing how you're going to get there? Is it Wi-Fi on every street corner? Or no child dying, as 2,000 currently do every day, for lack of safe drinking water? Is it powerful people driving change? Or the power of millions to trust their intuition as well as their intellect in choosing how to be? I think perhaps it's a combination of all of these, something we're still struggling to realize. Bridging the gaps between us by beginning with the gaps inside us. The left and the right, the yin and the yang. More inclusion, more balance, more of who we really are. That's my hope. Thank you.